This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff. We've had a few weeks off while I'm building our website, which I hope to unveil by the next show. For now, I dug into the archives of my practice show with William. We talk about his background and even about life extension, my favorite topic. This was recorded in September of 2020, maybe 6 months before we started the show. Enjoy the episode, and we plan to have more big guests before the end of the year.
All right, thank you. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club, Schiff, and on the line with us today we have William. William, thanks for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, with anyone where we're talking for the first time, I know you to be from Facebook to be an Ayn Rand fan. How did you get into Ayn Rand? Little background.
Yeah, it happened when I was in college, but I actually like to start the story when I was in high school because I grew up as a Protestant. My parents were Protestants, but we didn't go to church very much. So my real experience in church was just one summer going to summer school at church, and that didn't go too well. My brother got kicked out, and so we ended up not finishing. But I did grow up believing in Jesus and all that. And then in high school, I had a friend who was very smart. He was an Indian fellow, and he was an atheist. And he introduced me to the notion that I could not believe in God. And I didn't become an atheist in high school, but I did start thinking about that. Then in college, I had another friend who introduced me to a philosophy club, and it happened to be an Ayn Rand philosophy club.
What year
and
is this?
This was about 94, 95.
Okay.
I graduated high school in 93, and then my first year or two in college, this friend took me to the philosophy club, and we watched Leonard Peikoff's lecture, Religion versus America. And that kind of woke me up. It was like the clearest thing I'd ever heard in my life, and it just made a lot of sense to me. And it was the sort of intellectual clarity that a lot of objectivists now are familiar with, but I had never experienced. I was always in that confused Christian view. And in high school, I was actually quite kind of suicidal. I had these like heroic death fantasies, sacrificing my life for others and that type of thing. But luckily, I made it to college and saw this lecture. And then after that, I read all of Ayn Rand's fiction, like just in one big burst. And maybe a few months later, I decided that I was an atheist, and I gave up religion, and I started pouring myself into the philosophy of objectivism.
Okay, good. And then, so what? Maybe you went to some of the seminars. Did you?
Yeah. I went to. I have quite an extensive history with the movement. I went to a lot of the philosophy clubs, and I met a lot of objectivists, and I actually worked at Ayn Rand Institute, and then I left, and now I've been just kicking around on my own, visiting forums and meeting people outside of the official movement.
Sure. I got to admit, I don't know how much you want to delve into it, but that story about when you were religious, they have kind of taboos on suicide to stop people from doing that.
Yeah, it wasn't actual like suicide. It was the lust for a heroic death. Because as a guy, you do like sinful things. And so I was always worried that God was watching me and noticing all of my sins. And they were quite embarrassing. And so I was always thinking of a way to get out of this sinful state. And I had never like been in the church, so I wasn't familiar with repentance and confessions and that whole process of alleviating this feeling of guilt and embarrassment and sin. So I had this notion from the movies, I guess, and from just like war stories that it's noble and righteous to die for the sake of others, which is, of course, altruism. And that's how I wanted to go out. I wanted to redeem myself.
The idea is that when you went to heaven, that they would see that your courageous death, the sacrifice for others, would get you in, or
right, and that would absolve me of my past sins. Like it would make up for what I'd done wrong, like lying. Like when I was a kid, you do stupid stuff and you lie to your parents or whatever, and just personal things that are forbidden by religion, like masturbation. These sorts of things cause a lot of feelings of guilt and sin
Sure.
in you, and then you want to get rid of that, right, and atone for it. And the only way I could think to do that was what I had seen in movies and what I'd heard from other people, is that you sacrifice yourself in some noble cause that God would approve of.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the thinking behind the Crusades, or even of kind of jihadi mentality.
Right. It was a jihadist mentality in Christianity, and I'm sure a lot of Christians who have this similar situation, they're thinking these same things, and they maybe now it's just public service. Like they can redeem themselves by giving service to the state or fighting for Trump or something like that.
It's interesting. I always go back to it. It's one of the Brandon lectures where he quotes Will Durant, I think, saying that, people don't go to war or fight a crusade under the banner of reason. And that's part of where, and when you look at the military, there's probably a lot of Christians that may have some of those same motivations.
Right. I think there are a lot of that type of...
It can be noble.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, I'm sure. But in America, luckily, we also have a tradition of reason. So I'm sure there's a lot of very wise military officers who don't believe that. They're actually fighting for some secular values. So it's a mixture. It's going to be a mixture in America.
I think that's true. And we're going to get into the life extension in just a minute. We talk about that. I can jump into it right now. We can skip back to the movement. But I've come to the conclusion that once we get to, taking care of the basics of survival, that if we don't have a kind of higher purpose uniting us, that's what leads to either radical Islam or socialism, or if it wasn't that, it would probably be something else. That it's almost like a self-destructiveness that leads to a lot of the problems we see today, which is like either drug abuse or, just ennui or depression. And that when I look at life extension, I see that as the way to avoid a new dark ages. That we have that can put us back in that growth mentality of something we're trying to achieve, and that that's the reason we're for capitalism, is, at least partially, is because it it increases the rate of technological progress, and it is ultimately progress towards conquering the diseases of aging. And I look at it and I see that it is not just the goal of human life, but of all life. I mean, even the little plant that's growing up, in concrete, all life is seeking to extend itself. It goes back to Rand's morality of life, that which furthers the good, furthers life is the good.
Right. Yeah, I see where you're going with it. I agree with a lot of it. My only issue is the definition of life. It's a problem, I think, in objective type philosophies. Is what do you mean by life, and therefore what do you mean by extending it? If you see life as just the duration of life, like how much time can you survive? I think that's a slight mistake,
right?
Because there's more to it.
Even Rand would say, qua man as a rational being. So I agree with that.
And it's also not just rational, but happy. So you can live a long life, but are you happy? And are you healthy? So in my view, there's like three fundamental aspects to this question. There's the physical, the biological, and the psychological. These are all aspects of life. And you need to maintain all of these values.
Right.
Yeah.
No one's talking about extending for 1,000 years of suffering.
Yeah.
That these, but it's more that I don't necessarily even know what form it's going to take, whether it's transhumanism or some sort of merging with machines, or I guess that is kind of transhumanism, but the even just creating new even pharmacological ways, even stopping aging on the cellular level. But it's more about I want to, we're oftentimes, and I saw someone recently say that not only Rand, but the whole conservative libertarian movement is kind of reactionary and negative. We're saying, don't go towards more socialism, but we're not pushing something positive, an alternative vision. I mean, they say, yes, happiness and flourishing, but it's kind of as abstract as, going to battle for reason. And that in fact that it's living longer, that we can actually help reshape society, where the heroes are not these entertainers and actors, or, sports can be to some extent just because it's marveling at the human body, but that we would in fact start to, lionize medical researchers and people that can
I think we're doing some of that.
Yeah.
I think we're already doing some of that. We got, TV shows with doctors, they're not all very great shows, but you do see some of these daytime shows where they have doctors on there giving medical advice to stay healthy. And I see some of them becoming popular and becoming kind of pop stars, actually, like Dr. Phil and other people.
But it, almost where we want to see competition, like you would see among inventors in the 19th century, where they were trying to, beat each other to the patent.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. That show Shark Tank is kind of like that.
That's true.
That's another one of those shows where it kind of lionizes inventors, which is really great. I love that show.
I agree. I did too. And but it also, instead of being the ones, it's very difficult because I don't want to become the left, obviously. But one of the things that that I see the left as a new religion. And part of the way that manifests itself is the way that they just believe their way is inevitable. I mean, and that goes back to Marx. And so, they have this that drives them. It's the only thing that keeps people coming back to a philosophy that killed 100 million people already. And what I'm saying, by us presenting life extension as the ultimate goal of humanity, and that we want to avoid a socialist dark ages that leads to another 1,000 years of darkness. I was just reading about how they had the basic pieces in place during the Roman Empire for the steam engine. And they just
that's interesting.
Felt, yeah, and how much we could have had 1,000 years more progress by the time of our lives.
Right.
And
unfortunately, they didn't have the ideas. They didn't have the ideas to push back on Christianity.
Yeah, and some of Christianity was just some of the last gasps of an empire anyway. But Christianity did spread, and part of the reason I think that obviously people get into religion is their fear of death. And I think for me, realizing that made me a little more sympathetic to Christians, because I started out anti-religion too. But I've seen a change in the 90s where Christians were the dominant moralizers of society, and now they're just, it's gone the other way, and now progressives are the dominant moralizers. And so,
I've developed a lot of sympathy for religion as well, even though it's turned into a monster. In the beginning, when people were more ignorant, you can see it even in the biblical myths, the early ones in Genesis and the first few books, where they are discussing explanations for mysteries. If you really dig into those myths, I don't think they were intended to be taken literally. They were intended to be taken as like theories of why there are rainbows, like the myth of Noah's Ark. He survives this big flood, and then God sends the rainbow to say, I'm never going to flood again. That's kind of like an explanation for why there are rainbows. And then you get to other myths like Adam and Eve. Why are there women? And you say, oh, well, that's because God took a rib out of Adam and created a woman. And so it's just
right.
The myth is an attempt to explain why there are people, why there are different races, why there are natural wonders and that sort of thing.
Yeah, why things happen without having scientific explanations for them.
Yeah, and they were so clever that they created a whole book out of these myths and tried to integrate them into a system. And so you get this system of myths, which are a pre-scientific person's attempt at philosophy. And that's why it took off, and I think that's why it exists today, because a lot of the mysteries that the biblical writers were trying to solve still exist today. We still don't understand where man came from. Like, technically, we don't know how life began. So we've kind of put some of the pieces together, like evolution, but we don't know how life started.
Well, yeah, and even from the Enlightenment, you have like Pascal's wager saying, well, if you're going to die anyway, it's better odds believing in God, because you'll go to heaven, and if there's nothing either way.
Yeah, so what happened after they created the myths is you get people like Pascal who try to inject logic and reason to it, or apply logic and reason to it, and then it doesn't work ultimately, because some of these myths are absurd and science has shown that they're wrong. But still, you get people trying to apply reason and logic to these things. And so you get more sophisticated ideas of the Adam and Eve story. Like it's not so much, it's not literal anymore, and it's not really a myth. It's just kind of like an idea of what sort of happened, or like it's a stepping stone to some other idea that you could have.
Exactly. So I also happen to think that the longer that even a mystical religion exists, it tends to have to make some compromises with reality to continue existing. You know, like the Shakers
Yeah,
didn't really
I agree.
believe in having kids.
That kind of
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, that kind of gets back to what you were saying about objectivism is always attacking socialism and not so much providing like what is the positive future for capitalism. When religion realizes that its ideas aren't fitting with the facts, it has a couple choices. It can dispense with all of its religious mumbo jumbo or accept the facts. And in those cases, if it dispenses with the facts, it's not going to survive in a progressive society. In a society that progresses towards human well-being, it's going to be left behind. So it's kind of forced to go into the positive direction by nature, just naturally. And so this is what I was going to get to. So it's okay to focus on like the negative and attacking the negative because you naturally do the positive. If you want to survive, you don't really have to theorize about it. You can have some general ideas, but if you just focus on not doing what will kill you, then your body and your mind will naturally function in a world that will allow you to survive. And then all it will take is some minimal effort to survive.
I'm not sure. Well, that's a little different than trying to get like society behind the life extension movement.
Yeah, it is. I mean, getting them behind life extension is a complex effort, and it's a major purpose, right? I'm talking about the minimal level of purpose and just like living day to day. But you're talking about moving a whole nation in some direction.
Yeah, well, that goes back to the positive versus the negative because, I mean, this is us offering something positive that we're all working towards where death is the enemy instead of other people.
Yeah, I think that's a good goal for a philosophy.
Yeah, as opposed to, you've got Yaron Brook saying, oh, the next 4 years are going to be shitty, no matter who wins, and, we're just trying to slow down the disaster for now. Well, if it hasn't happened, let's go ahead and keep fighting for something. And not only that, but it also gives us a type of moral high ground to say, you want to call us monsters because we're not for, giving things, redistributing wealth. I mean, we think you're the monsters, and actually a lot of poor would agree that they would prefer to live longer, healthier lives, even as poor people, than to not. You have to be living to prefer anyway. That's the whole.
Yeah, right? It is important. Like I said, it is important to focus on what's negative, but also what's on positive. So what I see you doing is attacking the negative in objectivism. So you have a wider focus of positive going in a national positive direction, but then in the objectivist movement, you're kind of attacking what you see as the negative in objectivism.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you have to knock down what hasn't been working before you can build back on the structure. But yeah, I do think that objectivism has been part of that, just kind of focusing on flourishing and not letting things get any worse. And, I mean, even within the realm of death, I mean, you've heard Ayn Rand's quip that it wasn't her that would die, it was the world that would end.
Yeah, I think she was speaking metaphorically.
Yeah, but I mean, it just shows that it is within the concept of death that, it really, it's something that matters and that should have been addressed more. It's the ultimate extension of a morality of life. If a morality of life, then that helps determine her third question from the aliens. Well, the first two were who, where am I, how do I know it, and the third is what should I do? And
Yeah.
I'm saying that, that a lot of even the strife that we have today is, and that's what I've come to recently, is that if it wasn't socialism, it would be something else, that there would be something to feed off of without us having, when we were building the canals. And I mean, I was watching a documentary about that. I mean, they would lose like hundreds or thousands of people on a project like that, but it was just, there was risk involved, but I mean, that was the, part of building this nation.
Right. So that makes me think of what sort of life extension, in terms of the level of society or the level of politics. Are you talking about a focus on individual life, on family life, on city life, on national life? Like the Panama Canal, a lot of people died trying to do that because it was a national effort to improve the state of the whole nation, right? And even the world. I mean,
within getting people into the idea of life extension is also understanding that if we don't do anything, we can't let it make us risk averse, where, risk is in the nature of life. And so this isn't even something that would be stopping the reality. I mean, even if you stopped aging or, your cells didn't break down, I mean, you could still have your head chopped off. So life would still be conditional in that sense, just by the nature of reality. But that's, in terms of, I mean, it's about everyone, everyone's life focusing instead on, who owes this collective privilege to who. Because, I mean, that is embedded in society so deeply right now that we need something big to turn it around and get people to almost like drop socialism like a cargo cult, because they see a more positive vision for what's out there instead of just being like a William Buckley conservative trying to stand athwart history saying no. We're saying, yes, our way is better. If you want to, the technology that's going to be involved is actually going to lead to things like replicators, like they have in Star Trek, that's going to make the whole socialism view moot anyway. But you people, in persisting on just handing things out, disincentivizing technological progress, you are the monsters. You are the ones that are leading to millions of deaths and pushing us into, even if it's not a new dark ages, but pushing out the day when people don't have to die.
Yeah.
I'm still working through it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to think about there. I think one of the problems with socialism is that they reject the individual. It's like they reject the individual as an important political unit.
Sure.
And if not reject, they subordinate it to the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a major problem because it's the individual, of course, that is the primary metaphysical, physical, actual existent. So if you don't have the individual, you're not going to have a collective. But the collective also is important, which is something that I think a lot of objectivists have a problem with accepting, is that it's important when you form societies and form nations, is you got to take it into consideration. You got to take into consideration the whole, which is something that was done with the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was a national effort that was intended to benefit all individuals as parts of society, as parts of the nation. So
Sure.
that's the sort of life extension question we will face. If, let's say, we accept life extension as the primary purpose, then we will face the question of whose life, which lives should, if there's a conflict, which life should be more important than the other life. So that's the deep-seated philosophical question we're going to have to face.
Well, that is one. There's still going to be, jobs and things to do, but, even, I'm not ruling out working with Christians that want to live longer. Some of them may not like the message, but, in terms of people that just for whatever purpose they want to have their lives have meaning for their kids, or it's a way to, it doesn't have to be building the Panama Canal, but it can be about people doing more experimenting with different products and trying different things. And it's,
like Trump's right to try.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big part of it. Just every person that there's I had a friend on disability insurance. She had epilepsy, and sometimes in incrementally moving away from socialism, it's going to involve policies that don't get rid of these right away, these programs right away. But for example, she got she couldn't really work full time, but her doctor told her it would be good for her to work a little bit. And so she went to, she did like part time, and they cut her off of disability because she was working. Well, it's like, I may not like the disability program, but I don't necessarily want it to stop people from doing and being, or it just gets them in that mode where they're just like, I have to almost act more disabled than I am to keep getting benefits. And in that same sense,
you hear about that a lot with the unemployment insurance, where Trump lowered, I guess he lowered the uninsurance payment because it was incentivizing people to not work.
Right. And you have to have public policy with, an eye to what's going to incentivize people. Even within, Singapore, it's like they have unions, but it's like the unions are expected to, participate in increases in productivity and to do their. We've taken.
I'm not familiar with Singapore, but
go ahead.
Yeah, that sounds. I'm not familiar with Singapore, but definitely we need to incentivize people to be more productive and be able to sustain their own life. That's the number one goal, right? Is you can't have an extended life if you can't support your life. So
exactly.
That's the other question.
Well, and with all this stuff with the rent moratoriums, and who knows if there's going to be another sell-off in the market before the election. I half expect it, but that's going to be, and the thing that makes life extension happen faster also is capitalism. It what makes us richer altogether as well.
In terms of motivation, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say before we shifted topics, in terms of motivating people to accept life extension as the purpose of life, I was thinking of Christianity and how, when you think about it, the idea of immortality and atoning for sins and going to heaven, that's all kind of an attempt at life extension. It's not physical life on earth, but it's, some sort of dream of life that they have in heaven, extending past your life on earth.
Absolutely.
So you have,
the best
you
they
have
could
a
do.
spiritual existence. So your psychology lives on, but not necessarily your body. So they have like one half of it, right? So we can try to convince them that it's not really realistic to expect your mind to survive bodily death. So but I guess that might have to be the goal, to convince Christians that you're not going to survive bodily death. And so you need to focus on life here on Earth.
Yeah, I think in terms of in presenting this, I want to say that I don't see, religious people that aren't against this as an enemy. But in fact, the current dominant dogma that is explicitly tries, is anti-technology and slows things down is socialism. And that's part of what has to be torn out for it to happen. But yeah,
the real danger is socialism mixed with environmentalism. I think socialism was kind of tame before environmentalism came along. And now it threatens to completely destroy industrialized life. It's like we could maybe kind of survive socialism if we accepted industry and what we need to do to survive on Earth. But environmentalists have threatened that. And now it's being mixed with socialism. And you get these eco-fascists running around who not only want to enslave everybody politically, but they want to get rid of all industry. So it's just it's just insanity.
It's part of how it's become a religion that ultimately is nihilistic. That they just as soon have almost no humans as the best way to stop carbon emissions.
Right, and usually the smartest people are in science. So if you put the kibosh on scientific development, you're essentially rejecting the smartest people in your nation. And that's how is a society going to survive with the lowest intelligence running the society?
Right. And you also have people like Michael Mann, the climatologist that, was going around suing other scientists, and he's currently in litigation with Mark Stein. But, that's where, and then they intimidate people with the same cancel culture that's in that academia. And, then no one's willing to stand up to them, and then they claim there's 98% consensus.
Yeah. It's a tough deal, that cancel culture, because sometimes, they have a point. This always happens with socialist movements is they pick one example that's true, he's a real bastard. But then they use that to disparage everyone of his class. So there might be one bad capitalist who's a real jerk and monster, and we should just kick him out of society. But then they say, well, look at him. He's an example of all the filthy, greedy capitalists in the world. And that's their collectivist mentality being projected onto a whole class of people. And that's the real danger is their collectivism inside them is being projected outward onto all of us. And that when people accept that general hasty generalization or false generalization, and because they're too ignorant to observe reality for themselves, that causes a mass hysteria and an uproar and a rebellion against these different classes. And it's usually the rich. It's because the poor people, the poor people have to band together to survive more. Is the rich people have a lot of money and don't have to form groups to survive.
Right. If anything, they can pay for their own groups of protectors or.
Yeah, so it's a whole problem. It goes down to the metaphysical level of intelligence. Just intelligence and ability to survive. So if you don't have a great ability to survive using your brain, then you got to rely on the group.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've touched on some really good things. I think we have a really good back and forth. I think we should try to build on this.
Yeah, that was really great. I think we got into a lot of really deep issues, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Good. Well, great. Well, Thank you, Bill or William. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff, and we'll see you next time.